On Tuesday, Japan did something that would have been unthinkable for most of its modern history. Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's cabinet voted to scrap the country's ban on exporting lethal weapons, fighter jets, missiles, destroyers, all now eligible for export. After 80 years of deliberate self-restraint, Japan just opened the door to the global arms market, and the companies waiting on the other side have been preparing for this moment for a very long time.
This is not a small policy tweak. It is arguably the most significant shift in Japan's security posture since the country wrote pacifism into its constitution in 1919. And while most coverage focuses on geopolitics, China, North Korea, the Russia-Ukraine war, there is a parallel story happening in the corporate world that deserves just as much attention. Japan's defense industry has spent decades quietly falling apart. What just happened could change that entirely.
Japan's post-war arms export restrictions have a surprisingly specific origin. In Shinchubat Yohosifi, Prime Minister Eisaku Sato, under pressure from opposition lawmakers invoking the pacifist spirit of article, created what became known as the Three Principles on Arms Exports. The rules banned weapons sales to communist bloc countries, UN-sanctioned nations, and countries in active conflicts. 9 years later, Prime Minister Takeo Miki went further, declaring that Japan would refrain from arms exports in general. That single word, refrain, functionally turned a set of specific prohibitions into a comprehensive ban.
The rules evolved slowly over the decades. In Marsisu, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe replaced the Three Principles with a new framework allowing defense equipment transfers under strict conditions. Japan began sending Ukraine non-lethal gear, flak jackets, gas masks, radar equipment, and civilian vehicles, but the core prohibition on lethal weapons remained intact.
Until Tuesday, what the Takaichi cabinet approved goes far beyond previous reforms. Japan can now export fighter jets, missiles, and warships. The current restrictions limit exports to 17 countries that have signed defense equipment and technology transfer agreements with Japan. The exact list is not public, but it almost certainly includes the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, France, Germany, and South Korea. Every sale must be approved by the National Security Council. Post-to-export usage will be monitored, but the categorical ban is gone.
The timing is deliberate. Japan is in the fourth year of a 5-year plan to double its defense budget. In fiscal year 2026, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Japan will spend approximately $60 billion on defense, about 9% of GDP, up from the long-standing each percent ceiling that was itself a product of post-war political culture. The threat environment driving this shift is well understood: China's expanding military footprint, North Korea's accelerating missile program, and the Russia-Ukraine war, which reminded every government in the world that territorial invasion was not a relic of the past.
Here is the part of this story that rarely gets told. Japan's defense industry was, for most of the past 4 decades, a business that nobody wanted to be in.
Think about what the old rules actually meant in practice. You could manufacture weapons, tanks, ships, aircraft, missile systems, but you could sell them to exactly one customer, the Japan Self-Defense Force. No exports, no commercial scale, no global competition to drive improvement or justify investment. The domestic market was tiny by global standards, orders were unpredictable, and the profit margins were slim.
The result was predictable. Dozens of smaller subcontractors, the firms making components, materials, and specialized parts, quietly exited the defense sector over the years. Japan's defense industrial base shrank. Major contractors found themselves dependent on a single government buyer with limited purchasing power. The sector became, as one industry analyst described it, a business that doesn't help profits or corporate image.
That is a remarkable thing to say about an industry in a country with Japan's manufacturing reputation. The nation that perfected Kaizen, that built the world's most reliable machine tools, that holds dominant global positions in everything from semiconductor equipment to precision motors, and its defense industry was treated as a money-losing obligation.
The companies that stayed are household names in Japan, though less known globally. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries is the country's leading defense integrator, responsible for naval shipbuilding, missile systems, and aerospace platforms. Its annual revenue runs around 34 billion. Kawasaki Heavy Industries builds submarines, maritime patrol aircraft, and helicopters. IHI Corporation supplies aircraft engines and naval propulsion systems. And then there are the electronics giants Mitsubishi Electric and Fujitsu, both ranked among the world's top 100 arms companies by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, companies most Westerners think of as consumer or industrial electronics firms.
These companies have watched defense peers in the United States, Europe, and South Korea build global businesses while their own operations remained artificially confined. That era just ended.
Here is what makes this moment particularly interesting from a business perspective. Japan's manufacturers are not starting from zero. They are starting from a position of extraordinary technical capability, applied for the first time to a market without an artificial ceiling.
Consider Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. The company has publicly committed to doubling its defense revenue to approximately $2 billion, roughly a trillion yen, by the mid-2020s. Even before Tuesday's announcement, MHI's defense order book was growing. Its stock traded at Sornsen Watt Euro or yen as of this week, within range of a 52-week high, reflecting markets that had already begun pricing in the likelihood of this policy shift.
But the bigger story may be the Global Combat Air Program, known as GCAP. This is Japan's joint sixth-generation stealth fighter project, developed in partnership with the United Kingdom and Italy. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries is Japan's prime contractor, working alongside BAE Systems and Leonardo. The aircraft combines stealth characteristics, internal weapons bays, AA flight assistance, loyal wingman drone integration, and advanced electronic warfare capabilities. The timeline calls for a demonstrator by Nissan Ni-10 and operational service around Nissan Sandrock Wo-10.
The program is expensive. Italy alone has approved €1 billion for the development phase, and the UK has committed over £12 billion for the next decade. Japan's initial research allocation was 9.5 billion yen, roughly through billion, through fiscal 9-10 in April. 9 looks the participating governments awarded an $9 million contract for the aircraft's design and development.
Before Tuesday, the GCAP's export potential was legally uncertain. Japan's old framework made it difficult to commit partners to export sales. Now that restriction is gone, the GCAP's exportability was always part of the program's economic rationale, spreading development costs across a larger production run, and that calculation just got significantly more favorable.
Japan's manufacturing culture adds a dimension worth examining. The defense sector globally runs on procurement relationships, political connections, and long-established supplier networks. Japan is not known for those kinds of advantages. What it is known for is reliability, precision, and zero-defect production standards. These are exactly the qualities that matter in defense hardware, where a single component failure can end a mission or a career. Japan's manufacturers have been producing to these standards for civilian markets for decades. The question was never whether they could compete. The question was whether they were allowed to try.
There will be complications. Exporting weapons is politically contentious in Japan, and public opinion is more ambivalent than the cabinet vote suggests. The rules around monitoring end use are untested at scale. There is genuine debate about whether Japan's domestic defense supply chain, the one that lost dozens of subcontractors over the years, can recover quickly enough to meet new demand. These are real challenges.
But consider what just changed from the perspective of a global defense buyer. Japan is now a potential source of high-precision naval vessels, advanced air defense systems, and eventually a sixth-generation stealth fighter. It is a treaty ally of the United States, a responsible actor with no recent history of destabilizing arms transfers, and a manufacturer with a global reputation for quality. For countries looking to diversify their defense supply chains away from American and European sole source dependence, Japan is suddenly a very interesting option.
80 years is a long time to hold a policy in place. Japan's arms export ban was never purely about pacifism. It was also a product of post-war politics, alliance management, and a domestic political culture that used restraint as a form of credibility. Those conditions have changed.
What is happening now is a deliberate industrial bet. Japan is not just increasing defense spending, it is trying to build a defense export industry from a standing start, using companies that have world-class manufacturing capabilities but almost no experience competing in global arms markets.
Whether that bet pays off will depend on factors that are genuinely hard to predict: how quickly the domestic supply chain recovers, whether GCAP finds buyers beyond the three partner nations, and whether Japan's political consensus around the new policy holds through the next election.
The next thing to watch is the National Security Council's first round of export approvals under the new framework. When Japan's first post-ban lethal weapons deal gets announced, and it will, the defense industry math in this country changes permanently.
That moment may be closer than most people expect. Word count Sinwobal words estimated duration 10 mun 1 minutes. Format news flash.